Stephano vs Kiwikaki. A god-tier Protoss player who retired too early plays one of his last final important matches against one of the best Zergs of all time on his come-up. This is Stephano vs Kiwikaki from the IPL 3 finals. This occurred in late October of 2011. The game is firmly in its prime, streaming has really taken off, and a metagame has been established. There's Stephano right there, the first pro gamer I ever met in real life. The incredibly talented, gregarious, and fun-loving Frenchman. There's Kiwikaki, Jonathan Greneau from Canada. And if we think about Stephano's impact on Starcraft 2, it's absolutely tremendous. When Starcraft 2 began all the way back in the beta, March of 2010, the American macro machine, Greg Idra Fields, was the best foreigner Zerg. In fact, he was probably the best Zerg in the world along with Cool, aka Fruit Dealer. According to Idra, which this is 100% true, at the very beginning, back in the beta, it was him and Fruit Dealer at the top of the ladder, 100 ladder points above everyone else, which is staggering when you consider how bad Zerg was in the beta of StarCraft 2. Remember, back in that time, we're playing on maps like Steppes of War, Lost Temple, Metalopolis, Xel'Naga Caverns, and you can spawn in close positions on a lot of these maps. It's a very tough time to be Zerg. Fast forward to 2011, the game has stabilized a little bit. It's still Protoss and Terran favored if you're Zerg, but it's not a position where you're sitting there and you're asking yourself, how am I going to take my natural? And if you're looking at this map, you might be saying, you said you were out of the Lost Temple era. It looks like Lost Temple. Well, this is Shattered Temple. Lost Temple, if you don't know, is one of the most famous maps in StarCraft 2 history. It has a ludicrous high ground above the natural, which can be tank dropped. It's absolute hell on earth if you're Zerg, and was considered basically an auto loss until it was switched out for Shattered Temple, so the difference between Shattered and Lost Temple is there's no high ground over the natural of Shattered Temple. Instead, it's replaced with rocks that go to a third base, and you have to understand that the corner bases of Lost Temple were islands, so it was way better for Terran in that situation because Terran could just easily take the third in an island, and if you were Zerg in Wings of Liberty, teching up the drop was way harder than it is now, so you were never realistically going to be able to get up into drop. And also, obviously, island bases favor Terran, in general. So, Lost Temple was a Terran's paradise, and Shattered Temple wasn't great for Zerg, but it wasn't ludicrous, and that's sort of how you can think about the entire 2011 meta in general. It's still not great for Zerg, but you're not dealing with absolute insanity like you can see. In tournament maps, at least, they're using the neutral depots at the bases of ramps. Now, this wouldn't be instituted into ladder into 2012, which was insane, because it was an obvious problem from day one of the beta. Blizzard fucked the dog on it, didn't fix it for no reason for years and years and years, and players like Idra lost games that they never should have, because, they got double bunker blocked. If you remember famously, the game against Jinro where he lost on close positions Metalopolis. If we think about the history of StarCraft 2, Blizzard lost a lot more people than they thought they did long term by taking a really long time to fix certain things. As we see Kiwikaki open for a defensive forge fast expand into double gate, he's running around and checking Stephano's naturals, seeing if he has gas, how many drones he has, seeing if he's working on the rock to try to take a third. And Stephano is doing his signature build where essentially he gets a fast expansion and floods drones. Now, a lot of the time he would completely skip gas, if we fast forward 7 months. He's doing this fast expand build and taking a quick third off of gasless and droning up to around 36 before taking double gas. In this game, he went for more of a speedling expand, which is safer and more standard. Stephano's up 1-0 in this series, and I'm not going to be covering any of the other matches of this series because this one's an absolute all-time classic, this game specifically. And if we think about the context of this series, it's really big as we see the Zealots start to work on the rocks to that third base. Again, having the rocks going up to that third benefits Protoss because Protoss isn't really going to want to tech up into Robo to make a warp prism. I almost said shuttle. I've been playing a lot of Brood War to ferry a probe over. Obviously, it's even worse for Zerg to try to tech up into drop. So Whenever we consider the basic macro mechanics of things like island bases and rocks on thirds, we have to be honest about who it favored. There's no point in being ostentatious and dishonest about metagame balance from 12 years ago, as Stephano starts his Roach Warren. If we think about the impact of players in the early days of Starcraft 2, Greg Fields and Fruit Dealer were the best Zergs out the gate. Fruit Dealer sort of fell off as his aggressive style became less good, and he decided to help his parents with their fruit stand. Dan Artosis told me that Fruit Dealer retiring was more of a personal issue than one involved with the game, which I think is an interesting little tidbit, because a lot of people ask, like, what happened to Fruit Dealer? Like, where did he go? Like, why did he fall off? By the way, there's a whole series of videos on my channel between Fruit Dealer and Thorzane that I plugged the other day that should have come up in your sub box, and it's about the fall of Fruit Dealer, where I talk about that at length. Let me cough for a bit. I still don't have the fluid out of my lungs. So Kiwikaki with the delayed 2-gate opener is going to pressure the third base here. And right when he does that, Stephano intelligently trades out. Now, that was really good setup by Stephano to break the third base rocks, because it allowed him to backstab and delay Kiwi's third rather, and now you can see Stephano run into the nat, and as Kiwi focus fires the hatch, Stephano runs in with everything, knowing that his attention will be divided dealing with Ling harass. So you see, even at the absolute highest level, the concept of manipulating somebody's screen being put to use. Kiwi hammering down 4 gates. Stephano retaking his third, starting Roach speed M+1. But what I was saying about the history of the players earlier is that Idra and Fruit Dealer were the best off the rip, and Idra was very good, and was even very good up until this phase in late 2011. But come 2012, Idra wouldn't be considered like the favorite or the best foreigner at every tournament anymore, and that was because of the rise of Stephano. Specifically in the Zerg vs Protoss matchup, both Idra and Stephano had S-class Zerg vs Terrans, and Idra's Zerg vs Zerg was exceptional and on the level with the top Koreans, as we saw even right before Idra ended his career in BWC. Remember Idra's BWC 2012 group? It was like Roro, Symbol, and Stephano or something ridiculous, and like he destroyed the great Zergs, including Stephano. And it's interesting to think about Idra and Stephano, because the peak of Idra's powers of him being the best foreigner Zerg, Stephano was sort of the player that would take that mantle from him. Stephano was a guy who began his come up at this tournament in late 2011 and would be incredibly good, one of the best players in the world throughout 2012 and 2013 at the peak of the game's life. And whenever we think about Idra and Stephano playing each other, Idra was very good at ZVZ, and Stephano was almost to the point of hating ZVZ, where he was considering race-picking Terran at points in his career. Idra dominated the head-to-heads of Stephano and him, even when Stephano was at the peak of his powers. So Stephano moving out with the big Roach army here. Part of why Idra lost the mantle of best foreigner Zerg to Stephano is Stephano really learned how to play Zerg versus Protoss better than everyone, and he did it with 2 units, the Roach and the Infestor, as he snipes the Forge there easily, and we can see him starting to sort of expand out on the map with his creep. He has a plethora of tumors out. Stephano's creep spread was always good. He's taken the gold, he's flooding 13 drones, and he's surging up into that third base. Now Kiwi's placed a couple turrets, or cannons rather, to prevent Lings from counterattacking up there again, but you know, it's very crucial to understand that he's sitting over there to himself thinking, okay, well, he actually ran through my side of the rocks, not the rocks over here, which now I have cannons by, so I can't get Ling backstab, but of course Roaches are ranged units. Warp Prism out here to harass, but we can see a bit of APM being taxed as Kiwi knows that if he loses his third base, he's going to lose the game. Another crucial thing to consider about this era is there's no herp derp Ravager. So when you go Roach, you're like truly committing to Roaches. This isn't the sort of aggression that we see now that's tawdry and very risk-free, because if Zerg opens up for some cornball Roach aggression now, they can just make Ravagers after in transition and be somewhat okay against things like tanks, mines, medevacs, Prism, even air. In this era, it's not like that. If you hard commit to Roach, you can't shoot up. You can't break force field. It was a very different era. So whenever Stephano was going for this Roach Max style that came to sort of define his career, and everyone would consider, okay, yeah, he's doing a big Roach Max. He can max out with Roaches at 12 minutes. Stephano definitively sort of came up with this build. Look at this brilliant placement of the prism there. I've watched a lot of Starcraft and never seen that spot. Kiwi sort of knowing, okay, the third is there, the fourth is there. If he attacks, I can simply do a counter warp in. A lot of players going into the late game would opt for DTs. And Stephano knows, like, as soon as I move out, there's going to be like 15 Zealots warped in. I'm going to lose 2 bases. So he's going into Roach Hydra Corruptor. And it was very common in the metagame for this time, as both players were up to about 80 workers, for Toss to go into a safe third base with a variety of openers and then go into Robo Colossus and aim for a big range Colossus Robo Death Ball. And it was common for Zerg players to say to themselves, well, the Colossus dominates ground, so what I'm going to have to do is sit there to myself and say, okay, there's no way I can max out on ground army. I have to have something that can address the Colossus. So Zerg would make Corruptor. And the problem with this was the Corruptor was fucking worthless against the rest of the entire army for Toss. So when you consider the impact of having 30 supply tied up in something that's useless, and how that impacts army balance, that's very troubling. So Stephano using the Corrupt ability, which gave like a 30% damage increase, then sniping the Colossus. Now he's going to range forward with the ground army and start to hammer the Zealots. Notice charge not done here. It was way more common to delay charge to focus on getting a Colossus count. Charge was also 200-200, and the economy ramp up was slower. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. Stephano has a plethora of Corruptors, damn near 20 of them, but he's sitting here to himself saying, man, if only I had made 10 Corruptors and put the rest in ground army. Thankfully, he sniped the Observer, so he's going to be able to burrow and save his army. This was another thing that plagued Zerg, was Hydras were tremendously slow off of creep. So if that would happen where you moved out and killed an army, and then they did a big warp in or got a power unit like a Colossus out and turned the fight, then it was like, well, crap, like, he's going to push it back in his favor, and then I'm going to lose my whole army, you know. Remember, recall didn't exist in this time, and a plethora of damage occurring on the Corruptors. The only time the recall existed was on the Mothership, and it was virtually never used. The Mothership in general was virtually never used, and this was in fact the most famous game of Mothership use in StarCraft history. Stephano hammering away at the Colossus, and again with such a heavy commitment to Corruptor, he will do big damage to the Colossus and isolate them out, but he will not have enough ground army to follow through. You can see Stephano flooding Roach Hydra Ling, desperately saying to himself, man, I have control of the Robo units, but I just can't make enough ground army to really finish the job, to hammer the nail home. And while Stephano's macroing, Kiwikaki's hammering his Corruptors, which you can see with only 166 supply and a Robo still churning away, 2 of them in fact, Stephano can't afford to lose his Corruptors. Because what happens if you're playing a back and forth scrappy game like this where you're on the verge of killing your opponent, if you start losing your money units, you start losing drones, you don't transfer drones, you get supply blocked, you miss inject cycles, that's how you start to fall behind. What happens is, okay, I lost half my Corruptors for literally no reason. Well, now look at this. He has 2 Colossus out and you have 4 Corruptors as opposed to 20. If we think about the fighting, Stephano didn't actually lose many Corruptors while he was fighting. He went in and sniped the Colossus twice, and then he sloppily left his Corruptors out to be killed mid-map while he was macroing and injecting. Kiwikaki intelligently raging out, taking the risk of saying, okay, he doesn't have more army out here, I have to pick off some of these Corruptors, using good stutter step micro, and now Kiwikaki has officially held, and staggeringly, he's on 5 bases. When we think about Kiwikaki as a player, He had very good micro and was a technical player that would do cute builds, but I think of him as a macro player because, especially for his era, we were talking about Idra and Cool dominating the very beginning. I'm talking literally 2010, first day of the beta. Kiwikaki and a Protoss Korean named Trickster dominated the very beginning days of Wings, along with MC, formerly known as Iron, who was a sort of hard-stuck B-teamer in Brood War. And the reason that MC was so good at Protoss is he really realized this is the force-fueled race, and that's right from the mouth of Dan Artosis. A plethora of cannons already up for Kiwi. This is very intelligent to put this many cannons up in this location on this map specifically, because it covers not only the mouth to your pocket third that used to be an island on Lost, but the main as well. And we can see with a plethora of Colossus out, Kiwi is officially in a position where he is not afraid of a ground army. And crucially, the Mothership started up here for Kiwi. The Mothership is a massive part of this game. It had the Vortex ability that would create a huge hole in the map that would suck everything in and then spit it right back out over one tiny little spot. This was virtually never used as the Mothership was not really ever bought. And then the recall ability, which you would fly the Mothership wherever and then do a big recall. It was just like an Arbiter recall if you're familiar with Brood War, which, my god, if you're not familiar with Brood War, you really should check out some of my Brood War videos after this vid. And you should link this vid to your homies. Corruptors ranging around trying to look for stray Colossi, and one thing that Kiwikaki is doing here that I think is a bit incorrect, even though this is somewhat of a nitpick, he doesn't have enough observers. And we see Stephano with a plethora, a legion, a monolith ridge of Corruptors. He's saying, okay, I do not want to die to Colossus, almost running back a bit with the Roaches, almost melancholily fighting with the Roaches, sort of saying like, well, if I don't fight with the Roaches, he's just going to focus fire all the Corruptors again. He's going to kill out all the Colossus. You love to see that. But again, he's in this brutal situation that Zerg was constantly faced with, where they're saying, okay, I got 30 supply Corruptors, I kill his Colossus, but his ground army is going to decimate mine because Roaches didn't scale well. So even if you have Hydras too, the Protoss is going to beat you. And let's be honest, folks, Protoss wasn't ever really getting Storm in this era, and finally an observer is made, and he abusively blinks right up into the main as Stephano gets drop and fungals the main army. Remember, fungal at this time instant, wasn't a projectile, and did bonus damage to armored. Now, if you're a real old head, I'll also note this is after the neural parasite range buff, which like people sort of weirdly realized throughout Starcraft history that the Infestor was good, but Zergs a lot of times would screw up and not abuse it. Like people weren't really making that many Infestors when the neural parasite was at like a ton of range. And then whenever the Infestor could cast Fungal while burrowed, Zergs were also idiotically at not making enough of them. Zergs should have never lost a tournament when they could cast Fungal while burrowed. And I love how there's a Spore up and Triple Spine. Stephano crucially knew that a Warp Prism was over here and he was going to be screwed with in this area. Now, I want you guys to note and really keep in mind, excuse me, that these guys aren't just blindly making static everywhere like newbies. I know I've complimented static twice in a brief time, as we can see Stephano trying drop here, but they're putting static in the right spot. That 9 o'clock base where Kiwi has cannons literally covers 3 bases. Stephano having spines and spores up there, Toss and Terran are always going to try to drop that base, and he saw a prism up there before. So there's a big difference between just like, oh, he made static, so Gosu, and like, okay, he knew the threat was over here, he knew that he's right by the main and that a Warp Prism's going to be there any second probably. I remember a game that Idra played versus Moro, I think, I casted on this channel, where he had Overlords and Mutas patrolling over that dead airspace for like 6 minutes because he knew it was going to get dropped. This was a weird thing about this map and Metalopolis, was like, once Terran and Protoss got to like complete max in a truly scary army, they could really abuse terrain. I mean, we see Kiwi walking up with an entire God Protoss army, really taking advantage of the choke and the terrain, and we see Force Field Sentry hammering away, and oh my god, a beautiful recall, and he uses it just to get back to his base. And I know for current StarCraft viewers, that seems like nothing. Oh, that was just a tawdry exchange. Like, yeah, that literally happens every game. And then with the Mothership core, you old heads that it's watch Heart of the Swarm, and then seeing the Mothership core recall after a 3 base pressure on Zerg's third or fourth, who cares? But guys, let me say this with extreme emphaticness. In Wings of Liberty, this was huge. Literally nobody did this in Wings of Liberty. And to do it in a way where, like, you kind of got it sort of quick. Like, he got the Mothership in a way where it wasn't like he was just getting air. Like, the only time you really ever saw the Mothership was when someone was going into Sky Toss, and it was like, well, I have the Fleet Beacon anyway. I'm floating money because I'm bad and I'm going air toss, lol. So yeah, I'll make the mother. You didn't see real Mothership use like this. Is literally every single base on the map is taken. This is a true S-class macro game. One of those games where each player is getting the whole tech tree. Kiwikaki going for an identical macro play here, where he walks the Colossus up a clip, blinks in, Stephano intelligently trying to make defense down there static, but whenever your opponent has good upgrades and a tier 3 maxed army, like, you're going to have a forest of spines up there. They're still going to punch it out. But look at this. Stephano setting a Broodlord trap. Kiwikaki hammering down south says, hey, I wanted this base since 8 minutes in the game. Stephano saying, okay, he's not going to walk into me. I'll have to bring the fight to him. Will there be another recall here? Stephano hammering the Colossus here. Kiwi does, in fact, decide to recall. And I think he lost a bit of army on purpose there because he knew he wanted to make a few voids. He knew, like, okay, like, having 6 Colossus versus 12 Brood Lords is useless, because what happens is whenever you're playing Protoss and Terran, you have this big mid-game power spike when you get a bunch of tanks or Colossus. Well, holy crap, like, if Zerg suddenly shows up with a dozen Broodlords, all those units are worthless. So a lot of times, like, you'll just try to sack those units or, like, aggressively trade them. And Stephano moving across the map with Broodlords, which again might seem tawdry, but in this era it was very difficult to get up into Broodlords. And to get up into a Broodlord infestor army and have static defense, again, seems like nothing now when you can take every easy 4th base on every map, and the 6-range queen exists, and you can always scout his fungal on the entire army. Stephano with beautiful micro, and he neural parasites the Mothership core. That's awesome. So now his Zerg units are invisible. And again, this was one of those things that you might see now and see like, okay, I've seen it before. At the time, stuff like this was never seen before. People were literally getting into the game for the first time as Stephano retreats into spines and will be okay. People who are literally thinking like, can you neural a Mothership? Like, you can't neural an Ultra. Like, what happens if you neural a Mothership? I've never done that before, even like in a team game. It's sort of like knurling a probe and like killing a Protoss with the Protoss army after you pick Zerg. Like, it's something that, like, when you get into StarCraft, you ask yourself, like, can you do that? And like, you almost never get to try it. So to see it in a pro game is freaking crazy. Like, to see 2 of the best pros ever in a LAN final take literally every base on the whole map, build nearly every unit, and build out the entire tech tree, get 3-3. Was so cool. Like, you didn't see this a lot. Guys just weren't good enough to get the whole tech tree, as Kiwikaki is relentlessly attacking this right side, and he's probably thinking, okay, how much can I kill and get a recall off? He's also probably thinking, how many Broodlords does Stephano have left? Because I need to sort of adjust my army based on that. He recalls and sees, Jesus Christ, he has like 50 Corruptors now, and Void Rays actually countered Corruptors, which, whenever you moused over the Corruptor, it would say anti-air unit, and I know a lot of Zergs like me who started back in Wings were like, I'll make this to counter the Void, and it just didn't work because the Void does plus damage to armored, and it's not massive. The Corruptor does plus damage to massive, which is why you make it against the Colossus. Blank Stalkers here, blink under the Broodlords, try to ruthlessly assault the Broodlords trying to hide under the spines and the infested Terrans, and Stephano hilariously dove the Mothership, as normally you would see the Zerg player save the Mothership till last if he had vision, but the Mothership being used to such incredible use here by Kiwikaki that he really got it focused, which is hilarious. Like, whenever you see what's considered like a low priority target focused out, it really shows that you're doing a good job. It's like if you're playing support in a team game and like you don't do any damage, but you're doing such a good job with your role that you get hard focused even if the rest of your team's decimating them. Stephano with absolutely impeccable harass here. It's very difficult to harass on this map, especially when your opponent knows where to set up the few cannons. We see Kiwikaki making not only a Templar Archives but a Mothership. One crucial flaw that Protoss would always make in this era was delaying the High Templar. I mean, let's be honest, guys. It's literally 34 minutes in the game and he's getting a Templar Archives. He has 3k gas. Imagine if he had gotten Templar after his 6th. It's not like he's been starved for gas, as Stephano starts to hammer away at the main base here of Kiwi, who's completely running out of steam, and will have a Colossus come out sort of awkwardly here, as again Stephano has committed so much to the Corruptor where he doesn't have a ton of ground units, and he's starting to flood Roaches. And when you make Roaches 35 minutes in the game, it's weird, because again, they don't turn into Ravagers. Whenever you watch this game now, if you've only seen Legacy, it might not seem that special because you don't understand certain things. As 4 Archons get morphed there and the Mothership about to finish getting chronoed. If Roaches can't turn into Ravagers, they're worthless. You know, if the Mothership is the only thing that can cast Recall, playing Protoss is more punishing. Whenever Protoss can't have their force fields crushed except by massive units, it's way more punishing against Zerg. You know, like, these are the little things that we got to see in this time that we didn't necessarily get to see in other eras, as Stephano starts to hammer away at the rest of Kiwikaki's bases, kills the top middle base, did a touch of damage in the natural but was scared away by Archons, and thankfully for Kiwi, he's going to range over and save these Stargates, because whenever you're in a late game battle with Zerg, being able to have Stargates is big, because if they go back into air units or back into ground and pound, you'll be able to address that. One thing to consider is that Archons do plus damage to bio units. Everything that Zerg has is bio. Plus, Kiwi has +3 attack. He's been diligently upgrading all game. And I'll sort of cynically point out that, man, Stephano played so well. He harassed back and forth. He defended the harass so well. He took all these bases. He spread creep well. He even got Roaches back in bases that were considered unharassable and had cannons. But Toss didn't make Storm. Toss still doesn't have Storm. So sort of like Idra would always say and point out, like, you were always like Protoss being that one tick better away from just losing, even if you played perfect. And Idra's GSL career was defined by that in many ways. When you think about his best of 3 versus MVP in round of 16, where it was like, yeah, MVP was not going to make the little timing errors or be sloppy or skip that extra step. Kiwikaki knocking at the door of Stephano here, and both players are barely mining. Mains and naturals and thirds have long been mined out, and really the island base for Stephano was taken last, so that's mining, and then the opposite mains are mining a bit here for our players. And Stephano in this weird spot where he wants to fight on the spines, but he sort of knows, like, okay, this Protoss army scales better than me with all these Archons and Recall. He can hit me really hard in a spot and recall away, a novel concept. I know, as Kiwi blinks in and gets everything fungled, Neural Parasite trying to be attempted there on the Archons, and he'll bean dip and telly away, and a few Archons get stranded there. But Kiwi was in a spot where everything was fungled and his power units got knurled, and we can see the few power units that got knurled were killed after. And Stephano sitting there to himself saying, crap, he had a DT up in the corner. This is one thing that you noticed about this game is, like, these guys are trying to throw in harass even whenever big battles are going on. That's the sign of a good player. Remember when Stephano was surprised by the delayed 2-gate move out that killed his third? He sent Lings into the third and killed Kiwi's base. He actively had Lings out on the third that were able to run in and get that done. Probably not enough Lings to defend the push, but enough Lings that if in the right position before the push occurs, could delay the third. Again, this is a sign of good Starcraft where even if one player makes a good successful move, the other player counters and parries in some way. 3 Colossus being started here for Kiwi, and they are about to finish. And this is a great example of what happens when you build enough production. You know, 3 Stargates up here for Kiwi, or Robos rather. He had made 3 Stargates. This was a guy who wasn't afraid to get every upgrade. As we see, he has every upgrade now pretty much. And in addition to that, We saw 8 gateways at once in the production tab. Being able to spend your money quickly and efficiently is a huge part of StarCraft 2 and in Brood War, but in StarCraft 2 you have multiple buildings select. So if you get 6 base, yeah, make 2, 3, or 4 extra robos. When you go into Stargate, don't make 1, make 4. When you do your gateway explosion, after you build your 4th, or your 4th, your 5th, your 6th, make like 10 more gates at your extra base, you know? Don't just make 3 and sit there and float 1,000. The idea is to be able to spend your money quickly and efficiently, especially with Warp Gate, and we can see Stephano, the incredibly talented French player, start to do roach drops to harass the last remaining base of Kiwi. This almost reminds me of a Brood War game in the depth and the back and forth nature of the game, and the fact that Burrow was used to great excess, that multi-prong harass was used to great excess. Both these guys are counterattacking and making tier 3 and using the spellcasters as a void ray is trying to be made. Stephano hammering away at the Stargate, which is hilarious. Stephano in many ways was defined by his party boy personality, and I don't mean that as a slight. I mean that as to say that this was a guy that on day 1 of the event would go clean up the open bracket. He would get hammered that night. He would show up 30 minutes before day 2 started, play like a god, and get into the round of 8 finals day for the next day. And then he would get hammered again that whole night, show up and win the finals. This was a guy who was nearly infallible when it came to like IRL situations, phasing his play. Famously, one time he lost his keyboard and his mouse right before the tournament, like idiots, like lost his luggage. He had to play with a random mouse and keyboard he never played with before and still like made a deep run into the tournament. I can't remember if he made round of 4 or the finals or won it, but he made it all the way to round of 4 with some random keyboard. I don't know about you guys, but like if you were to just switch out a completely different keyboard with like different brand, different keycaps, different switches, I'd play like garbage. Like I got a new keyboard recently and was typing on it and I look like a complete moron. And like usually I'm a pretty accurate typer and I have good left-hand accuracy. Obviously I'm Masters League with all 3 races in StarCraft 2. You've got to be able to use your left hand a little bit, especially when your F2 is bound to a camera hotkey and not the Control-Alt newbie button. So it's worth noting that Stephano was virtually infallible when it came to these IRL scenarios, and Stephano sort of realizing after doing that roach drop, he is not mining. I do not have to attack. Really, what I have to worry about are Mothership recall tactics. And what's interesting about that is that's one of those on-the-fly reads where it's like, this guy's been doing this to me all game, and it's effective, and he's creative and sort of natured that way, and he's going to keep doing this to me again. This was in no way a standard thing and was completely unique, and that's why this game is so special and cool. So it looks as though Kiwikaki is going to load up for his signature tactic. Oh, and he recalls immediately to the main as he was going to try to punch out that right side. He got Stephano to move his entire army, and now he has control of the main. Stephano's slow, immobile army is completely caught off guard, losing the pool, losing the hive, losing the greater spire. Complete nightmare fuel here for the Zerg as Kiwikaki pulls the bait and switch and blinks under the corruptors to try to ward them off, as it's been a rough game to be a corruptor, as Kiwikaki, Jonathan Greneau, the incredibly talented Frenchman, has main base control of Stephano, and Stephano's probably wondering to himself, where the hell is that mothership? As that sounded a little more Russian than French, and my voice is still recovering as a recall occurs there. Phenomenal S-class level play there from Kiwikaki, and you've got to remember, there was only recall on the mothership at this time, and the mothership was made in like less than 0.5% of games. It was never used tactically like this. It was used, and I'm just going to put it over my main army, lol, and I'm probably going to forget to use the spells, and it's probably going to get neuraled or feedbacked or just focus fired by Vikings. So Stephano knows that, okay, this is the last base. I'm going to walk over here with my plethora of Broodlords, a damn near page of Broodlords, and try to snipe out this base. And this is one of those things where once you have this many Broodlords, once you get a full volley off, all the Broodlings on the ground do a ton of damage. Infestors on the ground waiting to try to trap the army. Stephano wanting to get big money fungals off and hammer the army with Broodlords, but again, when you're on the low ground, it's so difficult. He's trying to neural the money units. Those Archons do big splash damage, but with a lot of Colossus up, it's going to be hard for Stephano to close the game. He's going to throw up some beach ball infested Terrans, but a plethora of Broodlords are going to try to ward off the Archons with more infested Terrans coming out. Stephano's starting to gain a little bit of momentum, but with this many Colossus and the invisibility field out, the Protoss player can just mass splash the infested Terran, but crucially, the final base goes down and a staggering 21 minerals here for Jonathan Greneau, and he's going to long distance mine. Thankfully, that 9 o'clock base, which had been heavily cannoned for him and was a huge part of the game, is still up. And he's sort of in this spot where, okay, I'm not mining, and I don't even have enough money to retake the base, so both guys are sort of sitting there to themselves and saying, okay, it's pretty much over. And one thing Stephano did brilliantly was use Burrow to harass and then hide his harassment units and task the APM and multitask of the Protoss, and then pop the roaches or the harassing units back up once the army was out. And Kiwikaki has really realized, yeah, like I'm not mining at all. Let me bring some probes actually to tank. So both of these guys are pretty much done in terms of made army now that 16 roaches have been made. And Stephano is sitting there to himself saying, well, crap, like I'm about to get attacked. The freaking probes are on the creep. I better spend my money. Because if you fight here and the Protoss survives with 30 supply and he's just going to walk over whatever you have with impunity. As you might be asking, like, why did Stephano like to make crappy roaches? It's because his infestation pit, spire, hive, and spawning pool all died. So he couldn't even make the 3 range roach queen to try to defend. And this is a weird spot where both players really have no idea how much the other has, and once you're in this point of a 50-minute long epic macro game, the waters are somewhat uncharted. I mean, how many times in a Starcraft game do you and your opponent really take all the bases? Not a game where you're on 8 base and they've sort of been trapped on 3 or 4 and maybe they're playing mech, or a game where you're both on 4 for a while and neither can take a 5th, or a game where, crap, you're both on 5 but there's neither 6th base can be taken. Literally, the map has mined out. And whenever maps completely mine out, a lot of times there's ostentatious nuking or swarm host abuse or other insipid garbage occurring. This game has been non-stop, back and forth, lights out action. And Stephano peeks that base and says, oh, you don't have anything. Wow, I don't have to move out. Okay. It's very weird whenever you get in these base trade style games and you have to continuously ask yourself, is he still mining? What's his bank? I wonder if he's going to go for the same weird tactic he's been going for. Because Stephano, if he was playing someone like who was really good, say like Naniwa or MC at the time, he might be thinking to himself, okay, I just have to hold the middle and win. But Kiwikaki's been aggressing his right side base using Colossus walk-up blink tactics, but then crucially recalling. You might be asking yourself, like, well, didn't people attack like that on this map all the time? Well, no, not really, because they weren't going to risk their whole Colossus army. It was like, well, oh, I can kill that main base. Well, okay. Zerg's just going to trade their whole army and come kill you. Like, you didn't want to lose your whole big Colossus army if you were tossed. Crucially, Kiwi used recall here to attack bases and recall with impunity, which I realize in Legacy seems like completely standard, but at this time when the game was balanced and fun to watch, it wasn't. So Stephano's static defense being hammered there by Colossus, and Stephano wants to come over here and try to defend and force an engagement with Broodlords. Both players really want this to come to an end. They don't want to draw it into a stalemate situation. Stephano probably asking himself, like, well, like, perhaps I could get a bit of a neural off, but again, nobody played Mothership styles at this time. This was before the Broodlord Infestor era, literally months and months before it. So he wasn't thinking like, oh, I need to steal the mothership and waste the energy. Stephano running up here, Kiwi thinking about a fight, and Kiwi is going to get fungled here and throw a vortex down and catch a lot of the army, which Stephano runs some roaches in. He has, oh my gosh, another vortex occurs. So Stephano's entire army gets vortex, and Key was just going to camp under it. He threw some archons in there, and right when Stephano's army comes out, it's going to take a plethora of splash, but he can't just run away because the rest of the army, the broodlords, are in the rest, and all of Stephano's broodlords come out and get eviscerated by the archons, and that's an archon toilet, folks. The first ever archon toilet, as Kiwikaki casts 2 huge vortexes on Stephano's army, dumps archons in after, and uses the clump nature of the armies to have the archons decimate everything. Stephano here went all the way down to 20 supply, sort of sitting there to himself and saying, holy crap, I just lost. And says grats, which isn't some smart-ass comment Stephano would always type out with that. But it's just an incredibly interesting game, and whenever we think about like the turning point and like the context of this game, this is it for both players. This is like a anime last stand moment. Like neither one of these guys have anything left in the tank. The map is literally completely mined out. Not like, oh, the map mined out, like some guy played turtleneck and never attacked. Like these guys were going back and forth for 52 staggering minutes and mined the map out. This is one of the best games ever. And Stephano's on his come up at this point in his career and isn't quite at the peak of his powers. And this is sort of like the last big, the last big special move, like the last big like tri-beam of Jonathan Kiwikaki Greneau. This is the last moment where he can punch up with the best players. And this is the moment which like redefined and reshaped how the Mothership was thought of and used. Although it was never really used in this creative recalling fashion again. Although the Archon toilet was seen as the only answer to late game Zerg in the height of the Broodlord Infestor era. If we think about the Broodlord Infestor era, which would occur in late 2012 and go into 2013, Zerg was in a position where really Protosses would deal with them in 2 ways. They would do the parting Immortal Century Soul Train all in to kill them at 10 minutes before they could make Infestors, or they would try to play them in a macro game where you could use the Warp Prism and air switches and multi-prong like Prism Harass to try to pull the Zerg apart, punch out bases, but eventually you were going to have to fight like their Broodlord Infestor army, and this was how you dealt with it. You vortex the Broodlords and then threw your Archons in after, and then whenever the Broodlords would come up in a clump, remember Archons do plus damage to bio and severe splash. Look at the Broodlords' health there. Like that was only a couple Archons. Like once people, and remember, like obviously he had no money to like maximize his army, but like the idea is you put like more than 4 Archons in there, and the Broodlords come out and just get zapped. So this was a revolutionary game in terms of Mothership use, and sometimes we think about like someone in a unit being their signature, and like the Mothership is considered a weird god unit, and I just think it's funny that like Kiwikaki pioneered how to properly use this unit, and then it was never really used to the best of the ability again. You could say the same thing about Startail Life and the Zergling. Anyway, pimps, sub for more, stay easy.